Today we're going to finish up our study on trigonometry, and yesterday we focused primarily on the sides. Today we're going to move on to the angles. We're going to use the same concepts, which was our SOHCAHTOA, to solve for our missing pieces, but now we're going to be actually solving for angles. Notice here today we have sine A is equal to 4/5. So now we know the ratio already, and we actually need to work it backwards to find the missing angle. Well, just like we learned a while ago back in algebra, at the very beginning of algebra, we learned that we would divide. So in this question, most people would say, well, we need to get rid of sine, so we're going to divide by it. And they would get A equals sine, or 4/5, divided by sine. Well, in geometry, you can't, or in trigonometry, you cannot divide by sine. So something else was developed instead of that, and that was called inverse sine. So when we're trying to get an angle by itself is the only time we're going to be using this. We're going to divide by sine, but instead of saying divide by sine, we're going to do inverse sine. What that means is we've moved the sign from one side of our equation to the other side of our equation. We now have the variable by itself. We now have A is equal to inverse sine 4/5. Now, using your calculator, you'll have to use the second button, which if you have a graphing calculator is the blue button towards the top left. And then you would enter sine -1, which is inverse sine, of 4 divided by 5, making sure that 4 divided by 5 is in parentheses. That would give us 53.130 degrees. And we have our value of A. Now we're going to do the same thing for B and C. In order to get B by itself, I would divide by cosine, which would really be inverse cosine. Again, plugging that in on your calculator, which I hope you're practicing because you're going to need to know how to do this. Make sure that you get 55.150 degrees. And lastly, tangent, same thing, inverse tangent, enter it in your calculator, and you get 53.130 degrees. Okay, let's try a problem. Here we want to find the two acute angles of this triangle. Let's start with W. So I'm going to put Scooby over here, and that's what I want to use. Now, in order to find W, I really have to use the stuff I know, which if you look from W, this would be called a leg, the adjacent leg, so that's an A, and this would be the hypotenuse, which is H. If you think back, A and H can be used with cosine. That means I'm going to use cosine to solve this question. Cosine W is equal to adjacent, which is 3, over hypotenuse, which is 8. Now, do you remember from the last screen what we need to do? Hopefully you do, and hopefully you remember that we do the inverse operation. W is equal to cosine -1 of 3/8, which plugging that in on your calculator would give you 69.976. Now let's move on to T. T, I'm going to use sine. Sine would be opposite, which is 3. So looking at it from this angle, that would be opposite, and this would be hypotenuse. Sine would be 3 over 8. In order to get the T by itself, we need to do the inverse operation. Then using our calculator, we would get 22.024 degrees. That is all we have for you on the inverse sine, or finding the angle measurements. Again, we will talk about this in class. Make sure to ask questions because this can get a little complicated. So make sure to get off on a good start so that you really understand it well.